Now, one of the next little maintenance items I wanted to do, and I'm going to start with the RD, I want to change the fork oil, which obviously should be done on a regular basis, and you could check your service manual for how often, but I wanted to mention another thing. Now, when I originally changed the fork oil on this, I used 20 weight oil, and I lived with it for a couple of years. It was kind of soft, but the bike's very comfortable to ride, of course. But what I want to do is a little experiment. I'm going to put 30 weight oil in, and I noticed the manual, the factory manual, calls for 30. So maybe I should have done this experiment a while back. So what I did, I picked up a couple of quarts of PJ1 fork oil. The heaviest grade they make, the heaviest viscosity is 30, and it's so funny that the manual calls for 30, and I had put 20 in there when I restored the bike. So of course it's common sense that would tell you that just like adjusting the shocks, adjusting the forks on an RD, there's no spring adjustment other than you make the shims that go under the springs, the spacers, which I've already done. But I've never experimented with the fork oil, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity to do that. Now, the fork oil is subject to a lot of changing. As the weather gets colder, fork oil is way more expensive, more than double the price of regular oil, because it's supposed to, in colder temperatures, it's supposed to hold its viscosity. Warmer temperatures, it's not supposed to foam. It's got a lot of good characteristics, but I know a lot of people, including myself, years ago would just put in ordinary motor oil. But nowadays we have the option of this PJ1, as they call it, a fork tuner, because you can actually mix the oils. And so they make, let's say, 15 grade and 20, and of course if you wanted 17, you can mix half of each. Anyway, I'm not sure. It doesn't have to be that scientific. In this case, I just like to get it, the front end, a little bit stiffer, because we do ride the bike relatively aggressively. So my suggestion would always be, start with everything a little bit softer than you think necessary. Because in the case of most of the bikes from this era, especially these 70s bikes, it really didn't have any real fork adjustments. The choice you had was you could buy progressive springs for about $100. You could make shim springs that would stiffen it up just a little bit, give you, most of all, a little more ground clearance, because if you leave the front end and the back end very soft, you have ground out, you'll be grounding out the pegs and everything when you ride aggressively. But you always had the choice of changing the fork oil. The thing is now, the fork oil they have now, I think, is just a lot better quality. Gives you a lot more choices of tuning. So in the shop here, and I wanted to show this, this is just a basic 101 from, I guess there's not even a counterpoint to it. You want to set up a bike to ride aggressively. This is the first thing you want to have, is when the shock goes down, it'll go down, back up, and back to neutral. You don't want to have that. So the first test, and I know this is soft because I've been riding around a couple of years with this just like this. You got to really hold the front brake. See, and it almost has a full second bounce. See that second bounce? 1, 2. So I know once I get a little bit, now on a modern sport bike it would be so easy. Click, 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 and you're done. Well, on these old babies, you've got to experiment. Now, I have already made shims for the fork springs, but I'm also, once I change the oil, I'll consider making, if this doesn't stiffen it up enough, longer or shorter. Also, I have thought about doing the Race Tech, the gold valves, maybe over the winter. Again, I don't know. Then you get into a lot of money, a couple $100, and complete disassembly, a lot of work. What we're going to do today is going to take about an hour. You drain the fork oil out, relatively easy. Replace the fork oil, and maybe even get a little test ride to see if that's going to help or it's going to go in the direction I want it to go in. The first step, relatively easy. There's always, on the older bikes, there's always a screw for draining oil. Not true on modern bikes with upside down forks. You've got to take the fork and dump it out on most of them anyway, like the R1. But anyway, these older bikes, relatively easy. Now what's going to happen when we drain the oil out of here, you'll see this oil is going to be black. Here's a simple reason. Inside of here where the spring is rubbing, when you go to compress that spring, it bends. and it rubs on the side of the fork tube. So what's going to happen is this oil is going to be just like when you change the oil in the engine or the transmission. It's going to be kind of gritty looking, and that's one of the reasons it's always a good idea to change it often, every couple of years or so, no matter what the manual says. And it's relatively easy to do. 4 ounces of oil go in each leg. So what I'm going to do is catch the oil as it comes out and see if I still have 4 ounces of oil. Because if all of a sudden I have 2 ounces of oil, I know it might have been weeping out somewhere or leaking or something else. I should have, when I get this done, I should have 4 ounces of oil. Now I'm going to put a towel underneath this just in case. I put a little sandwich bag with some electrical tape around it just to catch the oil, because my beautiful Bordello rug here, I don't want to get this rug ruined. Now I took the set screw out, and of course putting a hole in the bag doesn't mean anything. You can put the screwdriver right through the bag, but I just want to, now what's going to happen as I compress this, you can see the oil coming out. Well, and it's black and gritty and dirty, which it virtually always is. I put towels underneath. I'll do one side at a time. You can hear it. Right now you can hear it. Now look, with half of the oil missing, look how flexible the front end is. So that oil is a critical part of setting up the suspension for that one bounce that everybody is looking for when you ride aggressively. Now if you're riding non-aggressively, you just want to ride on a couch, well, you don't need to worry about that at all, but it looks like we got the right amount of oil out of there. But what I'm going to do the other side off camera, and then what I'm going to do, I have to take Karen shopping. So I may as well do it now and just let the oil all drain out. Then I'll know exactly how much I have when we get back from shopping. Whatever's in there, I'm hoping is going to be somewhere around 4 ounces, 3 3/4, or whatever. The manual says there should be 4 ounces of oil in the forks. This is another trick. If you just poke a hole in the bag, you can basically get the screw to come out, and then just let the screw drop in the bag, because that hole in there is not going to mean anything. And when that drops out, there'll always be a little bit of oil, but you'll get the rest of it when you compress the forks a little bit. And then if you can let it sit for 5-10 minutes, go have a cup of coffee, take your wife shopping, or go whatever, I'll get that last little bit of that dirty oil. It has all the wear from them. That spring is wearing on the inside of the fork tube constantly. So if you never change this, your oil ultimately turns into grinding compound. And again, this is kind of a simple job, relatively easy. It'll be nice to know that both forks have the same amount of oil too. Boy, that oil is black. And this oil has only been in there, I don't know how many years. It's got to be 4 or 5 years, but it hasn't been in there since the bike was original. So imagine if you're doing a bike, this is a 41-year-old bike, and you have 41-year-old oil or a lot of miles. This whole thing is going to take 8 ounces of oil. It's going to be less than $5 in material and less than an hour, and it should give us a chance to fine-tune the front end of the bike. So now what we're going to do is just let that sit for, it'll probably be an hour till we get back from shopping. It should be totally drained by then, and we'll be ready to put the new oil in. I wanted to show how dirty that oil that came out of there was. Wow. Now I'll check, of course, that both forks have the same amount of oil, because that's the same amount I want to put back in, which is supposed to be, according to the manual, 4 ounces. Now if for some reason you happen to put too much oil in, well, you'll find out that you can't compress the forks all the way, and that tells you got to drain some of that oil out. So now we have the forks drained. Put the screws back in. Make sure they're tight, and that there's little fiber washers behind them. I cleaned that all up, so make sure we don't want that dripping and leaking and everything. And now the easy part, because I have my friend the electric winch. I want to just pick up the front of the bike, unload the fork springs, and I have to remove the handlebars, just slide them back and get at the fork caps. And a good trick for doing these fork caps, of course they're polished, and on any bike there's a good little trick Put a little plastic bag, a garbage bag, anything between the wrench and the part. It'll just keep it from getting galled up. Now my Harbor Freight electric winch. And boy, I have used this over and over again. It is so handy. Now imagine all the work you have in the old days would have come along. Just pick the bike up. I want the front wheel free, whether I want to just clean it or not. In this case, because I'm going to loosen the handlebars and slide them back, I protected the tank with a couple of old towels. But this is certainly the best $75 I ever spent. Very, very convenient. And you just up and down. Couldn't be any easier. It's really a great tool. And I'd always want to protect wherever the strap goes. In this case, I don't want it rubbing the paint on the side of the tank. But we've got the front wheel off the ground now. Piece of cake from this point on. Okay, with all the handlebar bolts out, that exposes that. Now it's going to be important. I don't want to put any gouges in that nut, so I'll put a plastic bag around it and then put the wrench on top of it. That'll minimize the damage that you do. That was our friend Billy Sargent that shared this tip. I think it's a good one. I've used it over and over again, but just an ordinary garbage bag in between that and the socket, and that'll protect that. We're going to repolish those before we put them back, but I don't want to put any gouges in them. Now in the last few turns of this, it's a good idea to just hold some pressure on it. Keep some pressure on the wrench, because when it gets to the last thread, this wants to jump up, pop up. So now with this, I just need to get a funnel and measure out 4 ounces of fork oil, and we'll be good to go here. And of course, repeat the same thing on the other side. Now when I've measured this out, I've measured out exactly 4 ounces. And what I'll do is I'll probably add about, I'm guessing, 10 cc's or some, just a little bit more, because what's going to happen, some of this is going to stay in a funnel. But I'd always suggest, if you haven't drained it, if that sat while I was away, but there's always a little bit still in the forks. There's always some. Of course, one of the things you could do if you wanted to take the spring out and wipe it off. But this way I know 4 ounces in, 4 ounces out. We'll be close. Now what I want to do is, while I have the last few drops, because that'll keep it pretty accurate, while that's draining down, I can take my cap downstairs to the polishing wheel, clean this up just a little bit. It's very easy to clean it when it's out, because when I have to put this back, I'm going to have to put pressure on it to compress the spring. Even though the forks are extended, this is under pressure. So what I really like to do is just, may as well right now, because it serves two purposes. It lets the last few drops, so we get this accurate. And I always think every time I take something apart, and I can polish the parts while I have it apart, it's a good time to do it. So now all the oil should be down in there. We just need to get the wrench, compress that part, and it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea anyway. Just put a little bit of grease on this, just the slightest little bit, so I don't booger up that first thread. This is one of the parts of the job that, if you have a friend handy to help you compress the spring, that's real nice, but I always try to figure out ways to do everything like I'm a desert island or something. I don't know. Anyway, but it is always doable. Maybe a little more work. It is hard to press that down, catch the first thread without boogering it up, but obviously if you're careful. All right, now what saved our bacon here, of course, is our little, in fact here I got some caught in the threads, but anyway, I can back that out and just pull that out. Okay, that side's already done now. Now it's just a question of turning this around, move the handlebars out of the way, and repeat the same thing for the other side. And the last little thing is just to snug up. I don't want to make them super tight because I may want to get a final little setting on this. I just make these tight, and then what'll happen is I'll be ready right now to take this down off the lift and see if we've got an improvement. And then I'll tighten these up with the final tightening. Oh, I always blue Loctite those. On this bike, I blue Loctite almost everything. If you don't have one of these in your shop, this is one of the handiest tools I've ever bought. Now what I've waited for is just to do the test in my mind and see if how much we've stiffened up the front. That oil made quite a difference, and we don't have that double and triple bounce now, which should mean, well, we need a test ride. And that's the best part of any of these jobs. The best part of having old bikes is going for these test rides. Well, so much for the test ride. You can't make this up. I didn't even get my, look at it, it's pouring. And here I am, foolish me, thinking I'd get a test ride today. Ay, ay, ay. Oh well, live to fight another day. So I hope you enjoyed the video and enjoy all the videos we post out there. There's about 1,200 of them now, a little over 1,200. And I hope it inspires you to work on your bike, whether it's an old bike or a new bike or whatever. We love these old bikes. Keep them running, keep them smoking. And thanks for watching.